Well, Ari, it's great to finally get you on the podcast. I think that we've been planning this since like last fall, and
I know.
it's insane how having a kid can just like completely alter everything. Like every day is a different day. It's like pick her up from daycare is like, oh, you're really sick today. I guess the next week is now taken up for me, with taking care of you.
Yeah, I don't have a kid yet. In fact, my wife and I are actually probably soon on the way there, but I certainly have a lot of friends with kids, and I know that it just introduces an entirely new set of both challenges and opportunities and new experiences. In fact, my co-founder just had his third kid a couple of months ago, so
Oh
he's
wow.
we're sitting on Zooms all day with a little baby on his lap a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's how it works out. It's fascinating, right? Like it's almost like you get to experience a new phase of your like what you were like potentially,
Mm,
but from the outside, because like how you remember being a kid is totally different from how, your parents experienced it, right? Like it's
totally. Does being a parent, do you find it like does it give you sort of a new respect or new understanding of your own parents?
yeah, I would say so for sure. I can now I understand their struggles a little bit more,
Yeah.
and I guess the flip side as well, right? So, I never really had a good relationship with my dad,
Mm,
right? And I always assumed, right? I always gave him the benefit of the doubt, like, well, maybe things change, right? Like when you have a kid or whatever, and
yeah.
whatever it might be, and maybe I'm too early on into it, but it kind of I guess reinforced it in the wrong way. Is like, hey, like he had no excuse to
Yeah.
be
Totally.
this way, right? Um, but like it's awesome. It's my favorite thing in the world. Like I enjoy every minute of it. Like my wife, my wife, she's a she's an early childhood teacher,
Mm,
and so she's used to kids, right? So I was going into this thing not knowing anything, and I was so nervous, and even the times where you're up, every 2-3 hours in the middle of the night and you're operating on zero sleep, um like I still didn't even complain. I didn't even like, it wasn't like a miserable, like, yeah, it was tough, I had no sleep, but like overall it was like, oh man, like me waking up at 4 a.m., which I'm not a morning person, right? So
yeah, yeah.
me waking up at 4 a.m. with this little baby, and she falls asleep like on my chest, like that's like,
It's the dream.
I don't need anything else. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and sure enough, now she's too big to do that, right? Like,
Mm.
if she tries to sleep on me, like it's uncomfortable for her.
How old is she now?
She is 14 months.
Oh wow. Cool.
Yeah, but
Wow.
but I'm like,
You've
I'm
you've
I'm
you've been in you've been in it for a little while now. You have kind of the protocol.
yeah, yeah, it took a while, but we're in a schedule, we're in a routine now, so, and she gets it too. Like today at daycare, like she did not want to go to daycare, and when I showed up, she's like, you know crying a little bit, complaining, but she knew that she would go. And
Hmm.
then there's other days where she's like, can't wait to get out of my arms, right? Like, get out of here. But it's really, it's a fascinating thing in my opinion.
I mean, it is our prime directive, right? Like that's what we're all here to do is to to procreate and to make more humans and I think there's something truly innate and like very deep within all of us of like, oh yeah, this feels right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're 14 months in and I'm already like pushing my wife, like, hey, let's get another one going. Let's get all this sleep deprivation out the way immediately.
Yeah.
Like it, people tell you about sleep deprivation with a kid and whatnot. And it was literally 2 entire months that I do not remember. And I went to dinner with people. I had, conversations that like impacted, the podcast and everything
Yeah,
like
yeah,
months later. And, I would be talking to my a friend of mine and he'd be like, "Oh, don't you remember like we were at this dinner and they were going to sign up for this thing or whatever." Like, no, I actually don't remember that taking place at all. It's crazy how your mind just like blocks it out and you somehow get through it.
yeah. Humans, if nothing else, are extremely, extremely adaptable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I'm not a morning person by any stretch, right? Like in college, if I was up before 10,
Yeah,
it was like a miracle, right?
yeah,
Um, but after 2 months of waking up at like 4 a.m., my body just like immediately switched over to, okay, you're getting up at 4 a.m. and you're going to be fully energized. And oh, like, oh, you got 3 hours of sleep. Yeah, you feel great.
yeah. This is
With
what must be
before,
done.
yeah. It's like before, like three
Yeah,
hours of sleep, it's like, hey, I'm not doing anything today.
yeah, yeah. It's like I feel like I was drugged.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well,
Um,
Ari, you know, I'm really interested in hearing how people kind of get their start,
yeah,
in this industry. And I'm wondering where your start is. What made you want to go down this IT/security route? And the reason why I start everyone there is not just to hear everyone's story, but it's for my listeners to hear everyone's story because everyone's coming at this thing from a different angle, from a different point of view, a different background. For instance, right, like I had someone on that was a former opera singer and now she's an application security,
yeah,
expert.
yeah.
And I'm sitting over here like how do those dots even, connect together, right? So, what's your story?
Yeah, I think I would say perhaps not as disparate as an opera singer, but similarly, I think a fairly non-traditional path to being a founder of a security startup. Um, so I did go to school, studied foreign policy and security at American University in DC. And studied under a guy named Eric Novotny, who will become relevant later in the story. So just remember that name. He's a cybersecurity guru, one of the advisors to U.S. Cyber Command, DARPA, some other places. So I graduated college with a degree. I thought I wanted to be a diplomat. Um, More time I spent with people who worked in the government, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is for me. Ended up coming back to Los Angeles, where I'm from. Worked as a foreign policy advisor, and then I was actually excited to talk to you about this. I started a podcast. I started a podcast. This was 2015, called Millennials Don't Suck, which it was kind of like that initial wave of podcasting. So, I think competition was definitely less intense, and so we released maybe 8 episodes, and we were on the top 50 podcasts on iTunes and in the New York Times, and like got a bunch of press. And it was really, really fun. Like, just it was me and my buddy, just kind of interviewing millennials who we thought were doing cool stuff and kind of trying to, like, at the time there was like sort of a narrative about the generation, so we were kind of trying to counter that. Um, so that was really fun. It was totally obviously not what I studied or what sort of my focus was in, but I love talking to people. So I was doing that. It was going great. We were our audience was really growing. My co-host Matt then had a massive hemorrhagic stroke and ended up in the ICU. Who was basically almost killed him. He was in
Oh,
he still is recovering, as to this day. Um, so I didn't really feel like I could continue the podcast without him. It just kind of didn't feel like it was the same. I didn't have kind of the fire for that concept. But sort of I guess the consolation prize, and this is like you'll I'm sure you hear this a lot, like you can only see kind of where the path is in reverse. But like at the time, like it was just pinging all around. Because I had started a podcast just by myself that had become successful, people started to reach out to me and be like, "Hey, can you help me do the same thing?" And so I built out a production company called Curious Audio. Started that in, I think, 2016, and then built it up over the years. We produced, over 100 shows, sold some shows and some concepts up to like, Stitcher, Spotify, those types of places. Really kind of just cut my teeth in the podcasting world, in the media world, and grew like a, quite profitable business out of that. One of the sort of the things that got me back into this world of privacy and security was we were hired to basically to produce a mini series on the harvesting of human behavioral data. This was like kind of post Cambridge Analytica scandal at Facebook, and there was a lot of concern and talk about sort of what psychometric targeting and some of these things we're doing already and would be doing, especially as AI advanced. And so I was also hired to host that show. And so I got to basically travel around the country for 6 months. And I did it and this was pre-COVID. So I just like traveled around in person, interviewing everyone from policymakers to tech founders to, to people in politics, kind of every angle of looking at sort of how the harvesting of human behavioral data and the use of that data was affecting our society, us, how we interact with each other. And one of the really probably the most illuminating and in my for me at least sort of destiny defining conversation was with a woman named Judy Estrin, who she was on Vint Cerf's team that sent the first email at Stanford and kind of built many of the early internet companies. She like built the first Ethernet company. At one point, she was the CTO of Cisco. She was the first woman on the board of Disney. So I was sitting in her living room I guess this was late 2019, and we were talking about like sort of the asymmetry between just your everyday human and these big technology platforms, and how that was growing and growing, and it felt kind of like a sort of a Sisyphusian task to try and sort of overcome that power dynamic. And so I asked, Judy, what do we do? And she said to me, scale down for trust, interconnect for power. And it was like one of those sentences that I had never built a technology company. I had no really idea what she meant at the time, but I remember just getting goosebumps, of just like, whoa, that feels important. And it really stuck with me, just like scale down for trust. I've always been somebody who's really like close relationships have always been really important to me. Like I've had the same best friends my whole life, and really like being in integrity with myself and with the people that I trust is kind of the most important thing for me. And so yeah, I just kind of started thinking about like, okay, like scale down, what does that mean? And then COVID happened. My at the same time as COVID happened, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And so I was like taking care of him. It was COVID, so we were having to be super careful. And there was also like, I as somebody who studied geopolitics, I was always paying very close attention to the news. Obviously the Russia disinformation hacking had been happening, and the Twitter hack, I don't know if you remember that, where like, the sort of a lot of celebrities were hacked with kind of this God mode exploit. I just kind of I started thinking of like, scale down for trust, interconnect for power. Like how could that apply to a lot of some of the issues that we're facing? Like what if we could use the trust that we have in the physical in like the real world and bring it into the digital world in some way? So I called up an old college buddy of mine. We just started talking like, man, like what if there was a way to know that you were talking to the, who you thought you were supposed to be talking to? Like, what if there was a way to to prevent sort of a God mode level attack from occurring, with preventing somebody from moving laterally within a system. And really my aha moment happened probably around, sometime mid 2020. I was doing like a two-factor password recovery. I don't use password managers because I'm obviously they all get hacked, and I'm skeptical. So I had forgotten my password, and so I was doing a two-factor. But then, of course, my paranoid brain knows that I could be SIM swapped, I could be email spoofed. There's no way to know that it's really, like, passwords have always just really kind of gotten under my skin. And I was, at the same time, I was in a group chat with my best friends that I mentioned from childhood, and I was like, man, like, I trust these guys more than I trust myself to remember a password. Like, what if you could use trust? Like, what if you could just use trust as a security layer, or an authorization layer? And so that was when I called my college buddy up, who's now my co-founder, and I together we called up our old professor, who's the civilian advisor of Cyber Command, and was an Obama appointee on cyber, and kind of like a one of the leading minds that we have. And we started talking, and really at that point it was just conversations. Like I mentioned, I was taking care of my dad. He was getting sicker, so it was like it wasn't really the right time to build a company. Then at the same time, I think just like in 2020 there was starting to be some conversations more about things being, privacy being more of a priority, security being more of a priority. But I think even then, like, I think it was the world wasn't quite ready. Really the change happened like end of 2022, beginning of 2023, with the advent of like ChatGPT and sort of the AI explosion. And I started to see, like, okay, like, it is going to become critical to know that you are talking to the person that you think you're talking to, and to know that a piece of content can be trusted as coming from a human being. And it actually goes back, I mentioned Eric before, my old professor. He taught us this concept in college of the red internet and the green internet. And on the red internet, this was back in 2011, 2012. He was like, on the red internet, it's all going to be bots. You're not going to know who's real. You're not going to know what's real. You're not going to know who's trusted. 99.9% of the content is going to be generated by AI. And it's basically just going to be like a forest of misinformation. And on the green internet, you're going to know who's real. You're going to know what's real. And you're going to know who's trusted. And it kind of came back to, like, okay, what if we could take sort of trust that exists in small groups, scale down for trust, and use that as basically a layer of confirming each other's humanity, of sharing information only to the people who should see it, and then of being able to eventually broadcast information out to the wider world, that has human provenance and a chain of custody of like, okay, we know this information came from human beings. And so we Eric, being the cyber expert that he is, spec'd out an architecture, and we brought on we started building. We brought on a CTO and raised our first round of funding last June. Have been building in stealth for the last, I would say, I guess, 8 months. I'm actually, honestly, it's kind of fortuitous that our conversation has been delayed a few times, because we actually can now talk more publicly about sort of what we're building. We actually came out of stealth about a month ago, and are in private beta right now. So I would love to send you the beta when we get off this call, Joe. And yeah, we now have basically built a tool that allows you to leverage your trusted relationships in a kind of a new way, and bringing in a lot of sort of cutting edge cryptography, on device biometrics, public private key sharing, into an ecosystem that essentially relies on trust, to share information, know that you're talking to the right people, keep information compartmentalized, eventually API consensus across existing systems as a way of, adding additional layers of protection, and then broadcasting validated, cryptographically attested information out into the world.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, right? Especially with the explosion of AI recently, because it's like it introduces like it's a really good power, and it's a really like high risk as well. Like, yeah, I want to use ChatGPT to write, a better paper, a better
Yeah.
email, whatever it is, right? I
Yeah.
want to do that, but I'm also giving it more power to emulate me, right? Because I'm putting in text into my own words, and I'm saying write it better. Well, it's able to analyze how I wrote it to begin with.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, I don't know if you saw this story a couple of weeks ago, but there was a banker in Hong Kong who got an email from his CFO like, hey, we need to wire these people $25 million, like we're doing a deal. And, just kind of doing his diligence, he was like, okay, like, sure, like, can we get on a call to confirm? So he gets on a call to confirm. On the call, it's a video call. On the call, it's the CFO, some other colleagues. They chat about it. They talk through the deal flow. Everything looks good. So he's like, okay, great. Wires the money. Turns out, email was spoofed. Gets on the call. Everybody on the call was deepfaked.
Wow.
Money goes out to criminals. So that's like sort of a direct use case that our tool, sort of creating these end-to-end encrypted, what we call pods of trusted people, is really solving for, of sort of like upping the ante on, with generative AI, whether it's voice cloning, whether it's deepfakes, like a lot of the social engineering stuff that we're seeing already being so effective is just going to explode in its efficacy with AI. And so, I'm sure you're seeing it in your life, like families having sort of like a passphrase or something that they say to each other is a way of like, okay, this is how I'm the real me. But I think we're going to very quickly move beyond some of these just analog solutions, and I think that's kind of where our product starts to fit in the equation of like, this is something, we're not tied to phone numbers, we're not tied to emails. It's really the trust that you have in the real world, and then relying on your device biometrics, as the the decryption of the information fits into the stack.
So can we walk through maybe how your solution would have prevented, that attack, right? Because it's like, to me, I can piece it together,
Yeah,
but I think it'll make more sense coming from you.
100%. So there's a couple ways. Let's sort of, our system is built around this idea called a pod, right? So it's basically a group of people that trust each other. So let's say I want to start a pod. I go into the Kibu app, I create a pod. I'm then prompted to send out an invite to whoever I trust. So I send you an invite. You receive an invite. You're then prompted to take a photo or a video of yourself, proving that you are you. I then, within the Kibu app, receive that photo, see that photo or video. I say, okay, yeah, that's Joe. I then get to vote you in, and really the vote there is key, right? It's kind of, the entire system is predicated around this idea of consensus and quorum. Let's say then we want to bring a third person in. Same, and you could now invite someone, or I could invite another person. Same invite flow occurs. Then we both have to vote that person in. So that's kind of, it's adding a layer of sort of proof of humanity and then consensus into these flows. And theoretically, in that circumstance, if you've already created a pod with someone, right? You created, let's say, a month ago, and then you're on this call and you're saying, okay, these are the wire instructions, cool. can you confirm it in Kibu? Whoever the person that's deepfaking wouldn't have, they can't spoof. It's not attached to email. It's not attached to phone. So even if they SIM swap somebody, it doesn't work. They wouldn't be able to do it point blank. The second way you can create a pod is if you're in person with somebody. You actually can just NFC bump or QR code an invite. So then that's even more secure in that you confirm that they are in fact that person in person. There's no out of band evidence that that pod even exists. So the attack surface is essentially zero. And once you're in there, the entire thing is encrypted. Unlike Signal, we encrypt at the pod level rather than the message level. So everything inside of the pod is accessible no matter when you come in, right? So including the history of every action, of every vote taken, every file that's uploaded. We have a vault inside of a pod, so you can upload files, upload photos, videos, collaborate on documents. Another sort of, and this kind of goes into this concept of cryptographically attesting information. No file can leave the pod without the group voting to allow for it to leave. So it goes back to this idea of consensus and quorum. But if the group does vote to allow for it to leave, we've basically put a cryptographic attestation on that file as these humans created it, and each Kibu user has a public key. That's kind of how essentially each device has a public key. And so then we can have a chain of custody of these public keys created this information at this time. Then when the attestation occurs, a hash file is created of that content. So we can actually see, okay, this file was created at this time. These people attested it to be real. This is what it looked like when they attested it to be real. Has it been altered? Has it been changed? Yes or no? And so it's kind of really building, cutting edge crypto security protocols, and then bringing in kind of real world trust and building it inside of this trusted ecosystem where you have to be trusted. And then you can't even get in. There is no like PIN code or anything. Like you need to be biometrically authenticated into the Kibu app to be able to see anything inside. And so you actually have to be the trusted person.
Huh. That is, that's really fascinating because it sounds like that really would have, thwarted a lot of the social engineering attacks and breaches that we've seen.
Yes.
Like with Okta and MGM,
100%.
right? Because, it's fascinating, right? Before, when you would hear about cyber attacks, it would typically be something pretty sophisticated, something that is digital, something based on technology that is getting around a security control, whatever it might be.
So, SolarWinds being a great example of that, for instance.
Right. And it, like, everything now is kind of pivoting, because everyone's security is so top notch, right? Like all these boards kind of opened up the budget. It was like, okay, get whatever you need, because we're not doing any better than the people that are attacked, and it's only a matter of time, right? Well, now it's shifting. It's shifting to that people aspect, that human aspect, and
exactly.
Now we're having to come up with these new, innovative solutions to validate, you are who you say you are and whatnot.
Well, and not only that, but that's kind of where we really think our API layer becomes interesting, right? Because you spoke to, the MGM hack, for instance. So imagine if basically we call it consensus-based authorization. So imagine if, a particular database or a particular pushing code into production or accessing, or making certain authorization decisions required consensus. And it doesn't need to be obviously every decision. That would be organizationally inefficient. But these critical decisions that millions of dollars, or really that really can make or break a lot for an organization. Imagine if you then put just some of those critical decisions behind a layer of consensus of just the people who need to be trusted, that decision could happen inside of an end-to-end encrypted environment without having to rely on out-of-band comms like email or phone number or whatever, where you're communicating, okay, should this person have access to this system? Should this data be shared with these people? should this wire transfer occur to this person? Where those types of decisions are happening just among the people who are trusted within an end-to-end encrypted environment. We think that, to your point, like it prevents an attacker from, once they get in with a credential stuffing attack or with a social engineering attack, from like, if you can prevent someone from moving laterally within a system, like what we've seen, where it's like once they're in, they can just do whatever they want. If you kind of gate certain critical actions with consensus, you can actually prevent a lot of the damage that we're seeing being done.
It's really fascinating. You kind of started the conversation off with your former professor, right? And his role within the government and whatnot, or not really within the government, but interacting with the government and
Mhm.
whatnot.
Mhm.
And, with my own experience with doing some consulting and contracting work to different agencies, like you can see, his mentality behind how he architected the solution,
Yeah.
right? Like you can tell that this is definitely something with that
Yeah.
kind of that structure in mind, of how it operates and what it can interact with and what it does and whatnot. And it's something that's massively needed, right? And this isn't me, right? Like trying to pump up or promote, your solution or anything like that, right? Like you didn't sponsor the podcast or anything like that. This is a critical area that has a high demand, and people are kind of just like waiting around being like, man, when is this thing going to be solved?
No,
Honestly.
it's so funny you say that. I mean, obviously, I like I said, like I have a pretty non-traditional background when it comes to, security. I'm not like a super technical person, so I don't come at this from like a super technical standpoint, but I just like sit as truly like somebody who, I wake up every day and all I think about is like, I really think the world needs what we're building, and it's my job to give it to them. Like I see this actually as like almost like a civilizational level issue of like, if trust breaks down, if like we can't figure out a way to both know what we're seeing is real, know that we're talking to a real person, and also being able to just protect the most critical systems in our society from constant attack, things are just going to break. And so I like truly like this, I see this as like my mission. It's just like, how can I give this thing to the world that I mean, it's honestly really gratifying that you see it as well. Of just like, yeah, it seems like this is really needed, and there is a ton of solutions like it, that are trying to tackle it in this way. And so we're just trying to, we've just been building, and now we're just trying to get it to market and give it to people.
Yeah, it's like the security of the blockchain, but in the human format,
Yeah,
it's not code.
I call it the human blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting, your path into this as well, right? You studied international relations and the security aspect of that. And I also got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice with international relations
Cool.
as a minor. Looking back, do you think the mentality that program instills into people, do you think it kind of prepared you for the cybersecurity world?
100%. Oh yeah. And I mean, and yeah, thinking sort of about, operational security, about the need for compartmentalization, about the even like the need for trust and sort of mutual trust, um and understanding. I think like something that's always really interested me, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, is like, obviously like I'm a huge geopolitics nerd. I would imagine you are as well, but like sort of the nexus of technology and geopolitics as like really like even look at what's happening in Taiwan, for instance. Like our geopolitics is basically technology based at this point, and I think like it's now in the last even 5 years is becoming more cybersecurity, like everything is cyber now, you know.
Yeah.
um and so I think like, yeah, I definitely think that my degree prepared me pretty uniquely to, to think about this stuff in a way of understanding both that everything everything is probably, you understand, like, everything really comes down to relationships in this world at the end of the day. Like, we can put a lot of window dressing on stuff, but it really, at the end of the day, it's about relationships. And that's kind of the underlying function of what our product is based on, right? Is like, do you trust this person or not? If you trust them, you should be able to transact, to communicate, to safely share, et cetera, with that person in a way that you know is real. And you should be able to use, I think part of what I'm seeing, or what I've seen, I think we're seeing a lot of the sort of the impact that the internet is having on our society. And I think, to your point about all the benefits of AI, like, amazing benefits, it's going to change the world in so many ways. But I think we're also seeing a ton of negative effects as well, whether it's social media affecting how we are interacting, how we're talking to each other, being with each other, whether it's our politics, whether it's, the politics of radicalization, all these different things. I think where I see us fitting is like, how can we bring the sort of the trusted relationships that we have left in the real world? How can we bring those relationships into the digital world and really use those relationships as a way of kind of carving out a zone of safety that we can then operate in, and we can then sort of, move around digitally in a way that is a lot safer than what currently exists.
Oh, so, just thinking through, the design that you kind of laid out, um, would this be vulnerable to like a 51% attack? How, I mean, I don't know if it would be, and I'm just spitballing it, right? Where, if you're somehow able to compromise,
More than half the people.
51%,
Yeah.
right? 51% of the people in your pod.
Right. I mean, so a couple of answers there. One is, within the pod, security is entirely configurable. So for decision, for whether it's decisions or access to information that is of the highest level of security, we would recommend unanimous approval. So that's kind of the top line there. But let's say just a simple majority is required to execute an action. If you think about it, you would have to not only know all the members in a pod, which even Kibu doesn't know all the members in a pod. We just know the public keys. So you would have to somehow know that based on surveillance or some other thing. Then you would have to, within sort of a limited amount of time such that the other pod members wouldn't become aware of it, essentially coerce at least 51% of the people in a pod to give up their biometrics and provide access to then vote on something. As we know in the security world, like, nothing is 100%. But I think, like, if, let's say, your likelihood of compromising one person is 0.1, and there's 7 people in a pod, it's 0.1 to the fourth likely that occurs. I think that's a fairly low likelihood, that something like that might happen. And certainly, I think a better way of operating than, kind of what we're seeing currently, which is just like username, password.
Oh, yeah, it's really fascinating. It's just fascinating to see how technology is evolving in an area that seemed to be, or was thought to be solved,
Yeah.
right? Like, we used to think, like, insecurity, like, oh, if you just trained your users better, right? Like, you wouldn't have these issues. But, like, even now, right? At my day job,
Yeah.
there was someone that, had access to send money, large amounts of money within the organization, and they got, deep faked from the CEO
Yep.
saying, hey, send them this
Yep.
this money. And luckily the person just had an inkling of a question with it, and they waited until Monday, right? Until they saw the CEO again. And sure enough, he's like, yeah, I never sent that. I
But
never,
again, that's a numbers game, right?
right.
As deep fakes become cheaper, let's say you do that 5,000 times, even 1%, like you're hitting, right? And
Yeah.
so if basically you push those communications into a Kibu pod, there's a very, very, very low likelihood of that ever working out.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So, with the encryption part of it, I find that a little bit fascinating because now I'm starting to dive into, securing satellites with homomorphic encryption and things like
Yeah.
that on the side, of course. Um, Talk to me a little bit about the encryption and how it's kind of set up. Is there certain parts of your product that you potentially even open source,
Yeah, absolutely.
or pull from the open source community?
We've I would say, like, in the way that the iPhone was not, there was nothing about the iPhone that was entirely new technology. The sort of what the iPhone did was take a lot of existing technologies and bring them together in like a really easy to use, like user friendly ecosystem and sort of experience. I would say that's what we've done here. And yet, to answer your question about open source, number one, yes, we have pulled from open source, cutting edge open source crypto libraries. We also plan on open sourcing sort of our base level Kibu protocol as well. Like we want to build an SDK to be able to have people build consensus auth directly into their systems. We think that there's a massive opportunity there. We really see ourselves, I think I mentioned at the beginning, like we see ourselves as kind of building the trust ecosystem, using our Kibu consensus as a way of providing a foundation for bringing trust from the real world into the digital. And so, yeah, we're if you want to kind of check out the sort of the more detailed specs on how we do our encryption and sort of the everything that we're using, you can go to kibu.io. You can check out our white paper on there. There's a very detailed white paper on sort of how we're doing everything. I would encourage everyone to look at. But yeah, we're certainly we are we believe sort of that the way to be secure is to be open source and to have this thing poked and prodded constantly and make sure that there's nothing that we're missing.
Oh, yeah, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
To really get that consensus, and it builds momentum through that too, because more tech people are starting to be like, oh, this project over here
Yeah.
can be utilized this way and whatnot. And it builds momentum like that. It's to kind of go all the way back, right,
Mhm.
to the very beginning. You mentioned that you had that podcast and you saw that early success and whatnot. And, I can really relate to your experience, right? Because you said that your co-host had to drop out
Yeah.
of the podcast and whatnot. And you couldn't really keep on going with it. And, I started this podcast actually with a co-host.
Mm.
Um, and, early on he kind of dropped out. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if I can hold a conversation by myself. I don't know if I can do this thing all on my own. And, luckily or thankfully, I kept on going with it and I pushed through that uncomfortability.
Yeah.
And now I get to talk to awesome people like you. So, like, it's really interesting where life takes you when you don't just give up at the first, kind of hiccup or speed bump or whatever. You just keep on finding a way to keep going.
Yeah, man. I appreciate that. And I would also say, like, you're a fantastic host and interviewer, so I'm glad that you kept going. But yeah, I had this idea almost 5 years ago, and it's so funny. This is honestly, it's like one of my first public interviews about it. but it's something that's, just been in my head for a really long time of like, wow, am I dumb? Like this feels really necessary and useful, like to people. Like I feel like I need to build this. I have to figure out a way to build this. Um, and so yeah, it's definitely been a very winding road. Um, but I'm really proud of what we've been able to build thus far, and get people to believe in us and back us and get some amazing technologists to help us build it. Um, and I'm really excited for where we're going. I think like we already are seeing some traction in the enterprise market, with interest in our product. Really, like we're already seeing, yeah, we're seeing a lot of positive momentum of like, okay, yeah, people that are kind of at the top of the security game know that this is something that will be really useful. And so, now it's our job to just continue to build and iterate and deliver. And I'm really excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating time, also to see how potential attacks like ramp up in different ways, right? Because now
Yeah,
we're getting it's constantly like a arms race, a digital arms race.
it is. And I think it's definitely like I think one of the cool things about our product is that the security holes are humans. And one of the scary things about our product is that the security holes are humans, right? And so I think we'll see both sides of that for sure. But we've built it in such a way, I think, also because quorum is necessary really to do anything, make any major decision. Like we've kind of built fail safes into it, right? Where even if one person gets pwned, like it doesn't compromise the sanctity of the system. And you also can, if you find out somebody's been compromised, the group can just vote them out of the pot, vote them off
Hmm.
the island, as it were.
Oh, well, I definitely can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'll send you an invite to the beta when we get off here.
Yeah, that'll be great. Well, Ari, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time here, but before I let you go, how about you tell my audience
Sure.
where they can find you if they wanted to reach out and connect with you,
Yep.
and where they can find your company and learn more about it.
Yeah. So kibu.io, Kibu.io, is where you can check out the website. Like I said, our white paper's on there. You can also sign up on our website for the private beta. We're starting to send invitations out like end of this week. We've been testing it, with sort of the first layer of friends and families and team and investors and advisors, and we're now just starting to share it out a little bit wider, which has been really exciting. Me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, Ari Anderson. Anderson with an E, so SEN, not SON. I'm on Twitter, Ari Anderson. You can follow me there. And yeah, I'm really grateful, Joe, for the opportunity to come on here. I've had the chance to listen to a bunch of episodes, super interesting conversations. I've learned a ton, so I'm just grateful for your time and for whoever's out there listening as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks. I really appreciate the compliments, and I'm glad that you're also enjoying the content that I'm putting out and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.